After e4 and knight f6, we continue with knight to c3, and now d5. Okay, we push the pawn, black pushes, we take the knight, take the pawn in g7, they take with check, take with the queen, and force a swap because we have this threat. So queen takes, bishop takes, and after the only move, bishop takes. All these moves are forced. White castle alongside. And after the normal move, castle, knight f3. So we went through knight c6 and we immediately play bishop b5. So what happens after bishop to f5? White continues with rook to e1, immediately targeting something. Let's look at two responses here. Rook e8 to protect the pawn and centralize the rook. So it looks like a very natural move. White continues with the stunning g4, attacking the bishop. And now there's not really much to do for black because we're going to go through black takes. But let's see what happens if black goes back to g6. It wouldn't make sense to go back because anyway back on this diagonal, because anyway we're going to start pushing these pawns until they all get swapped, and this king is in trouble. Clearly, if the bishop goes to g6, we go on with the thematic h4 and then h5, you know, threatening to trap the bishop. So after h5 by black, how to deal with this? Take the pawn, and when the bishop takes back, he played rook to g1, indicating how amazing development is, to the point we can ignore our knight. If the knight gets taken, then obviously we're going to carry on. We got ideas of bishop h6, and engine says we have an advantage of over plus 3 or 4. If the bishop instead goes back and plays more defensive, this looks like it's kind of safe for the moment, but in reality white wins after knight e5. Swapping here is okay because we just improve our position, and we'll still be pinning this bishop, threatening h5. So back in this position, we're going to look at what happens after bishop takes in g4, how to simply deal with this. Rook to g1, and if bishop goes to h5, white continues with knight e5, and white is just doing so much better. The more solid move, which still leaves white with an advantage, is bishop back to g6, but then bishop to g2, trying to take the pawn in b7 and trap the rook, and also putting double attack in case the knight develops on the pawn on the square c6. So after c6, more solid moves, white continues with thematic h4. This cannot be met with h5 simply because after taking the bishop here, position is evaluated plus 5, and you can all tell why. I mean, it's not going to take long before white plays moves like bishop g5 and then completes the attack over g5. And if black plays like wants to develop the knight, but it can't go here but to d7, so he goes to a6, then you can simply play bishop to f3, threatening h5. And whenever this bishop were to go away from the g file, since we will have a bishop in f3, you could play bishop h6 and win the game for white. So back in this position, we're watching what happens after bishop takes, rook g1, and the bishop goes back. We set knight e5. What happens if f6, attacking the knight simply, and black wants to just leave things like this? Okay, then bishop c4 check. If this is met with king f8, white goes on with rook to g3, ignoring the knight. The idea is to play, because there's a king on f8 and none of these squares is accessible for the king, white is trying to play rook to g1 and win the bishop, or at least win material. If the bishop goes back to g6, you can win material. For example, you got a knight in e5. So we're ignoring the knight. When the knight gets taken, for example, right, rook to g1. And this is a win for white. There's no stopping this, and then checkmate, right? And even if black plays the most defensive move, still rook f3. And well, bishop protecting here doesn't make sense. You've got two attackers, and bishop to f6 is still met by this move, which is game over. In this position, after the check, if king h8, then knight f7 check. And the swap, for example, will allow the white player to take back with an attack on the rook. And when the rook moves, you can go to e7, and it's very easy to take it from there. So after the king moves back, white sacrifices the rook in magnificent style. King takes back, rook to g1, check. And then the king can't go back because of bishop h6. So after bishop to g6, bishop check anyway. Only move is king g8, but now knight d6 check, and we're gonna win the rook. So king h8, knight takes. And the funny thing is we're threatening checkmate in one move now in bishop g7, and there's no way to stop it. In this position we went to king f8 and king h8. What happens after the normal looking move? e6. Now the knight goes back to d3, and we have double pressure on the square e6. The king can't really defend the square e6 by going to f7, because after a bunch of swap in e6, we will be able to infiltrate the rook in g7, obviously. So after bishop to f7, white continues, crazy enough to take the pawn anyway. Bishop takes. And after bishop takes back, Bishop h6, either way would have happened. And now rook to e7, allowing the defense of the square g7. So if the rook had taken in e6, that would have been possible. But still, now white continues the masterpiece with knight to f4. The rook is pinning the bishop in e6, so the bishop can't move. And whenever we take, we will be able to attack this bishop g7 even more. So let's make a recap. After e4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, we attack the knight. The pawn in d4 attacks our knight, we take, and then we take on g7, we take with the queen. Queen is swapped for reasons we mentioned before. Bishop d2, bishop takes, and now castle long. Then castle, let's keep looking at this line where we go knight f3, and now bishop to f5. As we said, we continue with rook to e1, putting pressure on the pawn. And earlier we went through rook e8. What happens after knight to c6, we simply go and we will take it and then take the pawn in e7. So if black plays instead e6, then we take the knight, pawn takes back, and after knight e5, white will go on to win an easy endgame. In this position, let's not go through castle this time, because you know what happens after castle. We've been talking a lot about it. What happens after bishop to g4, which is a common move I've seen. When they target your rook immediately, they want you to push the pawn f3 so you don't have the natural square for the knight. Well, in this case, believe it or not, we go on with knight f3. We are happy to get our pawn structure broken. The reason is that, we'll see it in a second. Let's say bishop takes. Okay, we take back. What's the advantage? The advantage is that because black has a file that is completely open, then we take advantage to put the rook in g1. Whereas that is not the case for black when black takes back in c6, and then he can develop the rook to b8 with an attack on b2, but then you will just play a move like c3, and this is not a weakness. Having a pawn in b2 and one in c3, for example, and a king in c1 is just not a weakness. The rook and the bishop cooperating towards the square just doesn't do anything really. Whereas in this case it's different because this g file is completely open and we still have the dark square bishop, so rook g1, idea of bishop h6 in case black castles. White is just very happy to play the rook in g1. Let's keep going through the normal moves. Castling, of course, in this specific case, it's pointless to play rook g1 because then the king can go to h8. You're not going to be able to pin anything. Bishop f4 is the best move, targeting a pawn. So after c6, rook to g1, king to h8. Now white continues with bishop to e3. The idea is to get the rooks going on the g file. Black can't develop the knight to d7. It gets taken. The rook can't go to d8. So after knight a6, whenever it happens, this is perfect. You just take it. Pawn takes back. And now white continues with rook to g4. And the idea is to play rook to a4 and grab the pawns. Nothing stops white from winning this very easy endgame because of the pawn structure of the opponent. Yes, white also has a damaged pawn structure here, but we have active rooks. After that, we'll have full control of the a file with support of the bishop, and the rook is easily going to the 7th rank. In this position, earlier we went through what happens if bishop takes in f3 and then we take back. Let's go on with another developing move, knight to d7, more normal move. Okay, white continues with bishop to e2. The reason is, in this case, we don't have that much of a reason to allow black to ruin our pawn structure because black is one step away from castling and he's kind of going to be okay. So after bishop e2, long castle, let's have a look at this idea. White continues with h3, and after bishop to h5, well, obviously if bishop takes, then we continue this very open endgame with the two bishops. White continues with g4 and bishop g6, only move. Knight h4, we will be able to finish the game with the bishop pair. If black is really willing to save the bishop with bishop e4, attacking the rook, f3, forcing black to go to c6. Okay, then knight f5, attacking the other bishop. Bishop cannot go to f6 because of g5. If bishop moves away, you know you got ideas of knight e7 fork. It's gonna look so good. And then bishop can't go back. So after instead bishop to f8, saving the bishop and also protecting the square e7 where the knight was going to go and make a fork. The knight continues with knight to d4, attacking the bishop, and we're finally going to win this guy. Bishop can't save himself by going to d5 because of c4.